In this audio session, you will hear a conversation between myself and my sister Mary Jo. During our talk, we are exploring what is commonly known as manifestation, which most people understand as whatever we are creating in our lives. Manifestation, which in a very real sense is equivalent to creativity or creation, is a broad category that literally encompasses everything. Therefore, examples of manifestation would be money, property, career success, one-on-one relationships, but also family and friendships, health, and even spirituality. All of these and everything else fall under the umbrella of manifestation. Mary Jo is a Cornell University graduate with a degree in communications, and she's also an astrologer with decades of study and experience. Aside from her constant use of the language of the stars as a reference point in her life, she is an avid student and practitioner of everything and anything related to matters of self-development, self-improvement, and personal transformation. I'll also mention that she is currently involved in a business venture involving a soon-to-be-released board game which will be called The Treasures of Time and is based on the 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt when Akhenaten and Nefertiti ruled the world. The game is both educational and fun and can be played by adults and children 10 and older. All right, here is our discussion. How do you understand manifestation within the realm of astrology?
Okay, so I have thought about this off and on a lot through the years. And we have spoken about it too in the past. And one of the ways you can take it from any angle in astrology. However, Saturn is typically the planet of materializing things. It's not just the effort, but the reward of the effort. So Saturn seems like a really kind of obvious place to go when you're thinking about manifestation. And you had mentioned, and I like this idea of the polarity between the sun, which rules Leo, which is the fifth house, it's associated with the fifth house in astrology, which is about creation. It also, kids fall under that category, art, play, sports play, all of the Leo things. And the sun, which is the essential you, your essential being, maybe even your soul. And it's interesting that Saturn is on the other side of that polarity, ruling Aquarius, which is the 11th house of dreams, goals, friendships, groups. And Saturn rules that. So it is very interesting if you look at just the Sun-Saturn polarity. Sun, here I am, I create, and the polarities are very important, obviously. That's the whole theory of in astrology, when one planet, let's say something's going through your second house, it triggers the eighth house. You look at both things. Or the more obvious one, the first house, which is you, who you are, what's rising in you, literally your rising sign, versus the other, which is the seventh house. So when I think of manifestation vis-a-vis astrology, I think you could go to other planets. You could go to Venus and Mars, which are desires, and Mars is how you get things and how you do things, the courage to do things, the action. Venus is what you value, what you like, what you maybe even hold in really high esteem. So all of these, you can go in through many portals, I think. But I do think the Sun-Saturn is just the essential thing. Like I am, I create, I desire, and then I work through Saturn to make that desire come true.
So then what about the reputation Saturn has? In fact, the reputation of Saturn can be so bad that it even creeps into the language. Like you'll see the dictionaries. I remember even in WordPerfect, in the 90s, and it would say Saturnine, and it was like, this is not good.
Sour.
Right. So what about that aspect of Saturn, and how does that relate to your notion of manifestation, creation?
Well, I think it relates really well because if you've lived even, a reasonable amount of years. Even teenagers will tell you, even even younger child, but let's say a reasonably intelligent teenager will say, this is hard. I want this. I can't seem to get it yet. There's the frustration of wanting something and not having it come easily. Sure. I'm sure everybody has something that comes easily to them. True. But we all, if you're a human being, you're in the world, you're trying to get things done, manifest, you're trying to achieve certain goals, again, all related. And it's more common than not to have a delay, a denial, hard work, and failure. And yes, Saturn does rule those things, but it also rules the materialization of the things you want, usually over time and with effort and with a bit of suffering. So one of the things I've noticed, I'm sure you have too over the years, is if you look at a person's chart, everybody has Saturn somewhere. Everybody has Saturn ruling some two signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. And if you start to ask people, especially, I'm saying over 40, because before 40, you're the 20s and 30s, there's a big process of you owning your ego, going through the world, trying to achieve things. But usually past 40, people start to gain a little bit more, if you're doing it right, I hope, you're gaining a little more perspective. You're starting to, you're not quite in the third act of life, but you're already in, you've experienced some things. Maybe you've had a relationship fail, whatever. And what you notice when you look at charts is that the area where Saturn is, the house that it's in, and the house that it rules, the two houses it rules, people start to become really expert in those areas if they're doing the work and paying attention and not just, And so that's the really, really interesting thing about Saturn, that it's undeniably very difficult planet when it's hitting your planet, when it's hitting your, sun or any a return. It returns around 27 to 30 and again around 57 to 60. Undeniably difficult challenges come up. But it also tells you this is where if you work, you will get incredible rewards. In fact, you start to become an expert in that area. You can go to the person who has Saturn in the second house or ruling the second house, and I guarantee you, if they've been doing any work, by their 50s, they're going to teach you something. And I speak from experience, right? And sometimes you really want to teach people, and sometimes people will notice, oh, she's really good at that. But that's because I've paid a lot of attention. I focused, I worked, I failed. I was denied many times, all the things. But now you can come to me and I can tell you a few things. I can teach you. So
that sounds a little bit like part of the learning relates to patience and perseverance, because things happen and then you don't quite get it right. So then you try again. I'm reminded of this spiritual teacher I ran into, one of the Zen masters. And one of the things he kept saying was, only try, try, try.
Yeah.
I think that sounds like that's about it. So how do you now, if Saturn is really important toward manifestation, and that's like, in a way, the denial principle, it has this quality that feels, at minimum, it feels harsher. What about the other polarity in the social realm and even in the solar system? The two big dogs, as I often call them, are Jupiter and Saturn. Mm-hmm. What about Jupiter in this? Do you have assign a role to it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So in my experience, again, and we have, in families, you see this repeating patterns, or in, people that hang out together, often you'll see, there's a lot of Jupiter, like that person might have, Sagittarius rising, Pisces rising, a very focal Jupiter. They might be Sagittarius, or all the things that are very Jupiter related, or a very strong Jupiter in their chart. And what you notice is that people who have that in general, because there's always, you always have to, like everything, it's not 100%, but, astrology is looking at patterns anyway. So in general, very Jupiterian people seem to bounce back quicker from setbacks, seem to have more optimism, And sometimes, the shadow side, there's a shadow side to every planet, every aspect. That's how humans, there's the shadow side to everything. What I've noticed too with Jupiter, very strong Jupiters, is that the person can overestimate, way overestimate what they can do and then fall flat on their face. They can be boastful without any, reason to be. They can overdo it. And then, then that leads to a negative thing. So again, Jupiter in general is a very helpful, buoyant, by transit, for instance, when it, say reaches your sun or ascendant or some really big, key planet, usually, even if it's like a very small thing, you will notice like an expansion of energy and optimism. And I've also noticed what's interesting with Jupiter, this is sort of related, maybe not 100% related, but I guess it is. I've noticed with Jupiter, sometimes people will get really excited. They'll be like, oh, like I had a friend years ago who was Jupiter. She knew Jupiter was going to be on her moon and she was really excited. Then Jupiter went on her moon, and her very elderly cat that she'd been trying to keep alive through all these crazy things, like she would juice. I mean, I thought it was a bit crazy. She would, what was that called? That all these herbs, she would juice them and put a dropper full into, this poor cat's mouth. This poor cat was dying. Anyway, the cat died. And she said, well, how could this be? Jupiter went over my moon. And I said, well, it's interesting. I've noticed that Jupiter sometimes liberates you from something that is troublesome or difficult. So it's not always, hey, I just received a promotion, cash, whatever. It can be, oh, I've really been carrying this weight, and Jupiter comes in and relieves you. And it's not necessarily a relief that you 100%, like in her case, she had grief over her cat, but then she was able to put it in perspective because, again, Jupiter's understanding. And she was able to see, I was suffering trying to keep this cat alive, and the cat was probably suffering trying to be kept alive. And maybe this was really good for everyone. Again, manifestation is everything. I mean, otherwise we'd all be in bed all day, unconscious. The minute you're conscious and walk around, your manifestation might be, I want to get a good cup of coffee this morning. It doesn't have to be a big, huge thing. But Jupiter, going back to answer your question, Jupiter is enormously helpful. And you can see it in transit and you can see it in charts. Jupiter traditionally, where it is, what house it's in and what aspects it's making is telling you where you're kind of lucky in your life, where things kind of flow better, usually. So as an example, and I'll just use my chart, I don't mind. I have Jupiter in the 6th house, and knock on wood, I have been extraordinarily healthy my whole life. And I've lived a long time. And it opposes, in my chart, it opposes Mercury, which rules my 7th house. And I've had a very long and good marriage. I mean, 33 years and counting, and it's been a great marriage. So that Mercury is by opposition tying into my Jupiter and giving me, I think it's part of the reason why. So yes, to answer your question, Jupiter is hugely important. So it's not just Saturn. Yeah.
Okay. So then that sounds like, so Saturn, if Saturn is the work principle, the notion that you get, you're going to do something to create something, and then you're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to concentrate and work. So then what would a person do with the Jupiter to manifest something? What's the role of it as a personal planet, as something that is internal to that person? Not just saying, more likely to bring in the goodies, which it definitely is, whereas Saturn is more likely to, to bring the difficult stuff. It's like I've said to people sometimes, Jupiter, you find $100 on the street, and Saturn, someone steals your wallet. And that's the way they tend to be in a broad sense.
Right.
But then if you're creating, if you're trying to create or manifest, what does Jupiter, what's the role of Jupiter?
Well, that's a good question. So over the years, because also Jupiter's in my 6th house, I'm really interested in self-help and expanding, like getting better. That's kind of because wherever your planets are, there's a kind of obsession anyway. Jupiter and Saturn, I think everyone thinks of Pluto as obsession, but Jupiter and Saturn are such big pulls on us that in a way, because we have an obsession, maybe with self-help for me, then maybe I get better goodies from it. Who knows? But so I've had a big well, maybe obsession's the wrong word, but I've definitely had a big focus on that. Especially, I started, I think, in my 20s, really. Maybe people in my 20s, I was listening to Anthony Robbins. I was, oh yeah, that's really interesting. And, he has a method and a way of doing things. And then maybe there was a period where I was into Wayne Dyer, for instance. And so I was listening to, because like all astrologers or psychologists, everybody has their own style, their own message in a way, even though it's all kind of in the same genre. And what's interesting is in the last few years, I boiled it down, I think, to two approaches. And one is, maybe it is Jupiter approach. One is the Tosha Silver approach. That's her name. Yeah, Tosha Silver. She wrote this book. She wrote a couple of books. One is called Outrageous Openness, and the other one is called It's Not Your Money. And I recommend everyone read them. They're really good. They're short, easy to read. Her approach is very, I would say, Jupiterian, but also maybe Neptune. Her approach is this idea of we're living in a universe where you surrender to, you can ask for anything you want and ask for help. And you could use the word divine, God, goddess, Lakshmi, whatever. There's a more of a surrender approach to her style. You're still, let's say, wanting to manifest things, but for instance, let's say I wanted to manifest a car. I really need a new car, but I'm not finding the resources. She would suggest you write down, I really would like this really nice car. I don't care how it arrives, just, let it arrive. And maybe I write it on a piece of paper and then I offer it to this divine. That's the idea of surrendering to it. And that seems to me a little more Jupiterian, because Jupiter is more, like you say, the kind of unexpected abundance thing versus Saturn, which is, I'm gonna have to work for it in some way. Now you could say, well, you have to work to write it down. Well, yeah, there's always that. Okay. But the idea with her work is this idea that there is divine timing in life, which if you look at astrology, you can't 100% argue with that, right? And there is also a bigger force than you. And if you surrender to it by asking for, ask for what you want, but then work, let that divine bring it to you and notice, pay attention. That's one approach. The other approach that people have probably heard of her. Her name is Jen Sincero. She wrote the whole series of books. One is You Are a Badass, and her latest one is Badass Habits, which I think is her best book. Also recommend it. That's the more Saturnian approach. However, it still has a Jupiter in it. You know what I mean? Because you can't, in a way, it's kind of like both of them have both. Like you're still, in Tosha Silver's approach, you're working Saturn with this concept of surrender. Jupiter. In Jen Sincero's approach, you're working. So she has you come up with a mantra. For her biggest issue was she found herself in her 40s, barely able to make a living, even though she was educated and she was a freelance writer. And she explains in her book, and she's also very funny. So she's fun to read, very, very easy read and fun read. So this Badass Habits book, she talks about how she had this big problem with money. So she came up with a mantra, which for her was, I attract money easily and freely, something like that. And what she started noticing is, and she said at first it's laughable because you'll find a quarter on the floor and you'll go, oh, see, I attract money easily and freely. Whereas before her approach would be, oh, see, I could only find a quarter. I'm always broke. I can't, what is a quarter going to buy? Okay. And so what she noticed through the work of, that whole idea of perception, she noticed, things started shifting and it took time. Saturn didn't happen overnight. And at one point she says, and I agree, anytime you're trying to manifest something big, you will be tested in the sense of there will be a moment where you have to expand. Jupiter, I guess that's Jupiter. And for instance, for her, she had this opportunity to take a very expensive coaching course, which was going to help her make money, but she had to invest a lot of money. So she had to go ask a friend for that money. It was a huge risk because if she couldn't pay it back. So she put that pressure on herself, expanded her coaching. And from there, she went to a place of tremendous material security. So then she was writing about it. Now, they're both in there. Saturn and Jupiter are both in there. I would say, though, Jen Sincero's approach is more, you got to do this, you got to keep doing this, you got to bring your mantra on board, you've got to get these habits on board. Habits are also very Saturn ruled. And then you will get the reward, which is really, I think, what we're coming to understand just by talking. They're both Saturn and Jupiter, the reward. So.
Right. I mean, it almost sounds, when I hear you explain it this way, it sounds like if you look at the places that Jupiter and Saturn connect to, and how earthy and practical and grounded, say, Capricorn would be, and to a certain extent Aquarius too, because Aquarius is the social realm and it's very practical. You're just kind of mingling with people. It's to me that does fit the Saturn connection as well. But then there's a work principle. So with Saturn, you're saying you got to work. And Jupiter connects it to Sagittarius, Pisces. There you're more into the vision, because I heard you say earlier, you said Jupiter is understanding. Exactly, that's totally right. So you understand something means you can envision it. So when you hear a person say, I'm going to use a mantra, because you notice the examples you gave, both people had mantras, except that one person maybe is a little bit more, emphasizes a little bit more the notion that, okay, well, when you do the mantra, money comes easily and freely to me. And then she describes all the things that she's doing. The other person, in a way, is saying, no, maybe you just do the mantra and then things will happen in your life. But you could even turn that on its head in a way and say, well, if you wanted more Saturn, just do the mantra more, because you're saying maybe it's not enough to just put it once there and let it float into the firmament and see what happens. Maybe you keep reinforcing, which is more Saturnian, right? But so in other words, what I'm getting from what you're saying is Jupiter feels like the vision or the inspiration to even see what you want, to have a sense of this could be possible. This would be an expansion of my life from where I am now, because that's really what it is. People, if you want to manifest something, they think that whether it's a car, a house, a relationship, or even their spirit energy, it's an expansion. But then Saturn says, well, okay, fine. But if you want that, you're going to have to do some work, because envisioning it may not be enough. And then that's where you have to ground it through different forms of effort. So that's what I got from that.
Yeah, it's exactly. And also, for instance, maybe you want peace, like you want just a peace of mind or more peace of mind. And so then you have to sit down and maybe do meditation work or some breath work or something, that's Saturn, to arrive at the Jupiter peaceful, because most people, if you ask anybody, they'll say, yes, they might have a top 3 of what they want, but most people want to be at peace. They don't want to be tormented by anything mentally. And so that is work that you have to do sometimes to get there, especially if you get a piece of bad news. Now what? Now, right? And now that's related to the field of manifestation, because why? Because if my life's going well, and then suddenly I hear a piece of bad news, one of my kids has a health issue. Well, that's bad news. And now I can only control so much there, obviously. So now I have to work at getting peace, right? Whether it's, you could do all the things like go to the doctors and whatever, but you also have to work at finding peace within the situation while you're working. So they are very well related. It's almost like, again, a polarity, like you need both. But it's interesting that you brought up that both have mantras, because Tosha Silver in her book has this mantra, which is fantastic. It's very simple. It is easy for me to receive. And she asks people to say that. When I just gave this advice to a friend of mine who's having a major health issue, and I said to her that I felt like I was identifying that it was hard for her, which I understand. I'm very similar. I have this thing, like I can control everything. I'm very Saturnian. I got this, But then when life throws you a really big kick, you might have to just say to yourself, it is easy for me to receive, which could be receive help from someone else. It could be receive good healing energy from an energy worker. It could be receiving money to help you pay for your whatever health expenses. It's all related, and it's very Jupiterian, but the Saturn work is to get in there and notice I'm having this thought that, no, I don't need this help, or I don't want it, or I'm embarrassed, or So if you start noticing, which is probably Saturnian, you then start incorporating it and then start noticing, oh, what's happening? Because we're all, the thing that is very cool about Jen Sincero, that's why I love both these approaches, that she really identified so well, is that everything starts with your identity. So if you have an identity of someone who is really self-sufficient and now you're in this crisis, you are not going to say to yourself in every single way, it's easy for me to receive. You're going to be actually putting up blockages to it. And it's very subtle. It could be just simply like someone wants to give you some money and you're like, oh, no, I'm embarrassed, even though you really need the money. Right. So what I thought was great about Jen Sincero's approach is she said, again, identity. Well, what's that? That's your sun. That's right. We're going back to the Leo, Saturn. So Leo, Aquarius polarity. So she says you start with identity because we all have identities that we act out of. For instance, if I had the identity, I'm a bank robber, that would be what I'd be acting out of. And eventually I'd probably rob a bank, which I know sounds ridiculous, but because it's such a...
or like if you're Donald Trump, eventually I'm going to steal an election. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah, of course. But he's a perfect example. We all are. We're all acting out of our identities. So what she identified that was so brilliant, I think, is that you start with your identity. And her identity was, I'm a broke ass person who cannot make any traction in the material world. And she had all kinds of reasons and excuses. And she hung out with people who also reaffirmed that. Again, we all do that, right? Like, runners like to hang around other runners. They start to join running groups. Where's that? Aquarius, right? So that's another thing. Your identity tells you who you're going to hang around with. If I'm really into drinking, I'm going to hang out with people who drink, probably, because if I'm around a bunch of sober people, I don't know, I guess it could be fun, but I doubt it. So what she really identified that was so crucial is you begin with your identity and you identify what the blockage is to what you want. For her, she wanted material security, was really frustrated. So she identified that she had a mantra, which is involved with your identity, of someone who could not materialize things, who could not make, decent amounts of money. So she went at it that way. Maybe your mantra is, and of course that will vary depending on where you are in your life. Like, I'll give you another one. I know someone who's had a little struggle with a relationship, and I advised her and she took the advice and it really helped her to have this mantra on board. Very simple. I deserve a great relationship. Well, it sounds really like, well, yeah, of course, don't we all? But she reacted in a moment of crisis with the person she was with. She said, oh, yeah, I deserve a great relationship. This person was doing something that a person should not do in a great relationship, should not act that way. And because she had that mantra on board, she was able to throw that person out of her life. Now she moves on. And now, so again, doesn't mean like everything goes beautifully, swimmingly. It means that it's like a boundary issue, which is Saturn. You're saying, I do not accept that because I identify as someone who deserves a great relationship.
It's interesting that, when you were saying that, my mind went to a story by the late Thomas Ashley Farrand, who was a mantra specialist, and he knew all kinds of mantras and for all kinds of different things. And he mentions, a typical, one of the more well-known manifestation mantras is Om Shri Mahalakshmiye Swaha or Namaha. You're calling in Lakshmi. And he says that there was this person he gave it to, and the person was having problems with their business. And the traditional Hindu system says, if you want results because you're not getting results, they'll say, well, you're caught by a certain karma blockages. That would be more like Saturn, right? There are these things that are holding you back. So now you're going to turn it on its head by working Saturn and trying to undo the karma that's in your magnetic field that's attracting the situation as it is. This guy was having a lot of problems with his business. And so but the system says you have to repeat the mantra 125,000 times, which if you think about it, right? Om Shri Mahalakshmi Swaha. I mean, just that, no, because really do that and you'll get maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get in 10 in a minute, like that. So then start adding up, right? It's going to take a while. So this guy, he did this thing and he did 125,000 and his business was not improving yet. Like, I mean, a little bit, but he reported, hey, this isn't working. So they discussed it, and he at first he thought, well, I'll just give up. But then instead, he started another round. He started repeating it. And it was after the second round that his business really took off, right? But this is the thing. This is where you say, well, between the period where he's stuck and the period where it starts to flow, there might be hundreds of hours that he put in.
Yeah.
But then you say, well, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it is. But if you don't do the work, how's this going to happen, right? Now, he did it through a way that is, I would say, very spiritual, definitely more Jupiter, Neptune, Sagittarius, Pisces. Mm-hmm. But to do it at all is Saturn, because you got to show up and your body's involved. And some days you'll be irritated and you'll be trying to do the mantra, and the back of your mind is saying, this mantra, I'm making no money, So,
right.
So the whole process is those two again, right? So, and
Jen Sincero does talk about that, and she explains the process for herself. And she has you go on this journey if you want. You can, do this journey where you're identifying what you want to change. And so I liken it a lot to, most people have experienced this by the time they're in their 20s. There might be a period where you've gained a little bit of weight. Maybe you went through the holidays, ate too much panettone, whatever. And suddenly you find yourself, oh, you know what? I'm like, my belt is tight. And so, you do the things. Maybe you do intermittent fasting, you start walking or running, whatever it is. It doesn't happen overnight. Just like you putting on weight does seem like it happens overnight.
Yeah, but
that's Jupiter, right?
Yeah, that's Jupiter. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, this is the thing. I think that if people really understood that these principles are part of our lives, they're totally integrated. So any expansion, including your body, right? Yeah. So you think about it. Jupiter literally rules fat, and yet fat is the most important nutrient in a lot of ways. That's why a lot of these diets now tend to emphasize fat. It used to be for many years
low sugar,
they'd say you should not eat any fat. Now they're telling you fat is more important. But so it's super important. But when it runs amok, right, it becomes a problem. And then whenever you're leaning down, you're reducing. Anybody that does pretty much anything to do with becoming more fit, lean and mean, that's Saturn, obviously, right?
Yeah, Saturn. But of course, lifting weights, Saturn, Mars, or Saturn. But what does that take? It takes effort, pressure, and time. Right. And there's always that beginning where you're like, oh God, I can barely, when you start running again after a while and you're winded and you just like, you feel horrible. But then, 2 weeks later, you go out and you feel really energized by the run, and you start to notice all these great things. So at the physical level, it's really easy to understand. We often get very tripped up, though, at the other levels. And because sometimes they're really, truly subtle. Like, for instance, if you have a mantra on board, and when I say mantra on board, it's related to identity now. I'm talking identity mantras now. We're not talking like the full on, which I think are very powerful too. I've used mantra a lot. I use it especially when I'm in a really difficult moment and I get really bad news that I can't necessarily control, that I can't go do something immediately about. I use it to center me and calm me down. So mantra has that, I really believe, and that's another conversation. But again, it does involve Saturn work. But the manifestation is the peace of mind I get from the mantra. It calms me down so that then I can help and figure out what to do with the problem. So, okay, that is also manifestation, correct? Because I could get a piece of bad news and go into a tailspin and, cause 5 other problems in my life or make myself ill. Or I can use mantra from Saturn to focused, get calm as much as possible, and then I can do something about the problem. But what I really like about what the Jen Sincero thing is that her mantra is related to identity. And sometimes it's subtle and hard to figure out what your own blockage is. And, people will go to therapy, they'll go to an astrologer, whatever. But usually, and you probably do this in astrological readings, at any one moment in your life, if you're lucky, you have just one issue you're dealing with, right? Sometimes you have 4, but there's one thing you really want to manifest. I want to manifest peace. I want to manifest material things. I want to manifest a relationship. I want to manifest a better body, stronger body, healthier body. And those things that you want to manifest are related to what your internal dialogue is. Like if I say to myself, I'm a person who really avoids extra sugar in my diet, and I identify that way, then I am going to encounter sugar-laden things because our culture is full of them, especially in the holidays. But because my identity is, I'm not a person that touches that, or very rarely or very little, I'm going to act out on that. But you have to get that congruence. You have to really, for some people that comes easier. Some people have to get there because maybe they're pre-diabetic and they've been told by the doctor, you got to get there, whatever. But you still have to have a self-identity component to it that then you couple with Saturn. So the sun coupled with Saturn, that can then lead you to Jupiter. It's like you have it's like if I tell you, here's the map, you got to, and that's what she does. She says her map, she doesn't use astrology, but her map is identify what your mantra is that you have on board that's not working, change it, write it out, figure it out, maybe look at it, say it as many times a day, and then you will start acting on it.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds to me like with the mantra, it sounds like a combination of Saturn and Mercury in that the problem or the invasion, when you were mentioning bad news, is a sense that you get hit with something, and that you then feel the imbalance, the danger, the fear, all of that. Then the mantra, interestingly, is like a focal point, which is Saturnian. So that the Saturn, if it reaches a level of development, you could say it's the Saturn, you could say some other planet that urges this, whatever. But the idea is that the Saturn, as a contracting force, allows you to focalize the mind, and then you repeat the mantra. But that in itself illustrates an amazing principle, which is if you bring the mind in and focalize it, no matter what's going on, that mind will tend to calm down a lot more quickly than if you let it run around and you focus on this, focus on that, and you're literally expanding the problem. It's going to make it worse. But by bringing it in, you are settling and calming. And then there's the thing of how much you believe the mantra will help you, and maybe there's Jupiter, because Jupiter is more connected to belief or to faith or to a sense of great expectation. But the Saturn to me sounds like it's a little bit like a camera. When you're taking a picture, the lens has to move in. If you don't move it in, it can't take a clear picture. It's just like an amorphous mess. So that one I would say is, in practical terms, you're bringing in Mercury and joining it to Saturn.
Absolutely. And then you can bring in Mars, because Mars is action and courage and all that. But really, if you distill it down, again, the thing that I agree with everything you said, the Saturn is the focalizing force, because, for instance, if you're just saying, well, I want to get fitter, okay, that's one thing. But if you get a piece of bad news that can destabilize you, like family member sick or something, now you've got to figure out how to harness your mind so you don't go off into all these crazy tangents, which in themselves are mantras. Like if I go into a crazy tangent about, oh, this person is going to die, or this is horrible, that's a mantra. Okay. And again, there's that whole self-fulfilling prophecy and synchronicity. And I don't know the workings of the universe that well, but I know that if I want peace, then focusing in on the mantra, that if it's really, really bad, like if it's a really, really bad piece of news, maybe the only mantra is something like Om Mani Padme Hum, or something that just calms you down. But if you're in a place where, okay, the news isn't that bad, or you have a goal to, let's say, become fit, then you could just identify, like she says, with what is maybe blocking you. Like maybe you say, yeah, I want to get fit, but then you go to the store and you keep buying Oreos or something, right? Something simple like that. And then, so maybe if you have a mantra on board that says, when I go to the store, I only buy healthy food. Or when I'm sure there's a better mantra than that you can come up with, something like, I only eat healthy food. And you know what healthy is. Obviously, Oreos are not into that category. So again, then you have to work it, right? And then when you get to moments of expansion, because I also feel like most things are not just you arrive, there's levels of arriving, correct? Like, just like when a business is expanding, or you're working toward a goal at, say, work, and you're trying to get promoted, there's different levels, because now you've expanded. Let's say you get promotion at work and you're like, oh, I manifested this, fabulous, right? But then you realize, oh, this work, oh man, I don't know, I gotta, it's really challenging. And there's a learning curve, and maybe you don't like your boss now. I mean, right? So you're always at different levels. And so having a mantra on board that helps you connect to your solar power that says, or like, for instance, most people who listen to a lot of media, like I do, know about Glennon Doyle. She's a fabulous writer. She wrote the book Untamed, and it's a very feminist, very Eris Pluto, kind of stuff. And one of her mantras, she just a quick background for people who don't know her background. She was a third grade teacher before she became a writer, and she was an alcoholic. She had a huge problem with alcohol. Like, she would literally go to school, teach, come home and drink until she passed out and start over again. This is how, that's right. Really hard, really horrible situation. So she then hit rock bottom, as people do, and luckily connected with a good group, like an AA group, whatever, and started making her way back up. And one of the things that really helped her, this is the other third grade teacher had this mantra literally on the, how you go into elementary school and there's all these like big letters and things like, I can do it or whatever. She had, we can do hard things. We can do hard things. And she said that mantra, which now lots of people use, really, really helped her. Like, whenever she was having a really horrible day, she'd be like, yeah, we can do hard things, or I can do hard things. Very Saturnian. But she said that really helped her. And I've used it. Like, sometimes when I'm like, oh God, I got to deal with this, that. I'm like, okay, I can do hard things. Well, what is that? That's identity, right? You're just saying at that moment. And it's great that she had that for a class of 8, 9-year-olds. I'm thrilled, because the sooner you learn this, the better it gets, for as far as I'm concerned. But that's, again, same thing, an identity sun-based thing, where a kid who's 9 or an adult who's dealing with the problem can latch onto that in moments, because you will have moments. It's not all, as we know, there's the ups and downs.
It's interesting because, that's actually really graphic, because if you say I can do hard, as soon as you say hard, that's Saturn. Saturn is the best way to understand it is crystallization of anything. So, I mean, think about it. You lose your bones in your teeth. Those are things that are hard.
Yeah.
And then say in stones, the highest end stone is a diamond, extremely hard. So it's the logic of hard not being necessarily a bad thing. And so a person like that, as I might understand it, they've integrated their Saturn better. If they relate to that, even at the age where she saw this sign, it would mean that something in her is connecting to her Saturn and grasping, oh yes, this is something that could actually be a good thing about this planet, rather than at the opposite extreme. It would be, she would see it and not be affected positively and just think, oh, I'm depressed and I'm
right.
Which is the same. Right. It's the same idea. That's the collapsing Saturn. Because if you think about it, depression is another contraction. In fact, contraction itself is a Saturnian thing. And you could even say contraction, mastering contraction, mastering that.
Yes.
The key to mastering Saturn, and it's a very important life principle. Yeah, makes sense.
And it applies to everyone. Another thing in popular culture right now is Will Smith just wrote his autobiography or memoir, and it's very good. Highly recommend it. And also, you can watch the interview he did with Oprah on Apple TV if you don't want to read the book. And this man, by every measure, has had the biggest success. He's been #1 at the box office for so many years. He talks about that with Oprah. A long and fruitful marriage. He has 3 kids. He's had a really, really successful life, and people love him in general. He's a really beloved actor. And of course, he also has had a lot of failures. His first marriage failed. And he goes through that in the book. And the point is, the message he was saying, which I think is such a powerful message to Oprah, is that, people look at me and go, wow, he's achieved it all. He's done it all. And I have done a lot. But guess what? I've also had to work Saturn, especially in the last few years, through a lot. He's gone to therapy and worked through a lot of his earlier trauma from his childhood. He had quite a bit of trauma from his childhood, because he had a father who was complicated, alcoholic, and beat the mother. It was complicated. So the point is, it's great. For the biggest service I think he's done by telling his story and being so honest and working on it, is he's letting you know, look, you can be the richest person, the good looking, great wife, whatever, but you know what? You've got to work through your stuff, So for him, he had to work through the inauthenticity of how people saw him and how he saw his life. And I think it's just wonderful to get that message, because let's face it, in the West, especially America, we have this, really skewed thing about how money will make you happy. Well, no, it won't. It'll make your life more comfortable. It's great. I welcome it. I love, being comfortable, but it will not make you happy, because you can have all the money in the world, but then you get a health challenge, right? Or your relationship, your husband or wife says, you know what, I'm leaving. And you're like, wait a minute. I thought money was going to solve all my problems, right? So my point is just to say that at the root of it, yes, Saturn is there always, because no matter what, in all phases of life, we're working on something. And that's what I like about Saturn too, is Saturn is that sober principle. It's the principle that, yeah, this is really great, and I'm grateful for it. Like, for instance, the common thing, let's say you come into a lot of money. People always say, oh, it'd be so great to win the lottery. And then you hear all these stories about people who, Jupiter comes in, gives you all this money, and years later, they're as broke as they were when they started, or they've got a bunch of other problems. That's because there's an imbalance. Like, Saturn has to come in and go, okay, this is wonderful, Jupiter, thank you for all this money, but now I have to figure out how to take care of it, how to grow it, how to invest it, how to keep it away from my family members who are going to be calling me daily. Hey, I need some money, whatever it is, right? That's the idea, that you cannot have one without. I loved in the Patreon how you said that Saturn rules ice and not water. So maybe the moon rules water or something. Yeah. Because that's the point of crystallization, right? That, things flow, you can have expansion, but without Saturn, it's like the idea of embodiment. You wouldn't have a body, you would just be a spirit, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that with Will Smith, there's no time. I don't think there's a time for him, but.
No, there is. He's a Gemini rising, I believe. There's a good time for him.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So I have the chart.
Yeah.
So he is. The interesting thing is he's a Libra, and you always look to Venus when you see Libra, and Venus is opposed Saturn.
Yep.
And so is Mercury, right? And he happens to have 1, 2, 3, 4 planets in Virgo, which means Mercury is very strong because it rules those planets. It's a major dispositor in the chart. So it's got Mercury conjunct Venus, opposite Saturn. This is a very Saturnian person in the sense that he's going to relate to that principle a whole lot. And what ends up happening with people like this, as I understand it, is that, and you need a certain amount of, I guess, in some ways, luck, because you could see where if he, in his life, maybe if the situation with his upbringing is negative enough, it could damage the Saturn too much, and then he won't be able to grasp it. But if he's able to survive it, and he's got a healthy Saturn, that opposition to the Venus Mercury, person like that is subconsciously programmed to work, and they don't even think it's work. They just think, this is what I do. And curiously, it's across, in the whole sign system, it's across the 5th, 11th, which is the place of creativity. So this is one of those people that is obsessed with creating, with manifesting, literally, right? Manifesting all the time. And the Jupiter in his chart in Virgo, because it's in a way linked to that through the Mercury, already, in a way gets taken care of, becomes a really important planet, in that he probably has it wired in as well, where he's, to him, it's an expansion thing. But it's great to see that the Saturn there is clearly, coming across as helping him manifest. And, you could even add that there's the other thing. He's a Libra. So even though the Saturn is 23 degrees and a half, and the sun is 3, so there's a huge gap, they're still opposite signs. So there's still, in that way, there's a dynamic challenge. And to me, that strengthens the Saturn, to put it on the other side, provided the person is able to express it in a healthy way. That's the secret.
And that's the key, because if you read the book, which I read, he says that his mother was a great force in his life. His father was complicated. He taught him the Saturn principle, which it's a great story if you listen to, if you read it, or if you listen to the interview about how he had, his father had him and his younger brother, they were only like 9 and 6, build a brick wall in his, in business. And he would have them mix the cement. And then he taught him to not look at the wall because it becomes too discouraging. Just look at brick by brick.
Oh,
And
cool.
he literally tells us, that's how he starts the whole book. He tells the most Saturn story.
That's totally Saturnian.
Magical.
That's
Yeah,
totally
it's the
Saturnian.
most, but it's beautiful. It's
Yeah, but
beautiful.
see that right there. What you're doing is just, first of all, a wall is Saturn. Like, this is
Yep.
like a Saturn teaching you. Okay, you're going to build a wall. That's perfect, right? So we're going to do Saturn.
Yep.
So then, brick by brick is the idea of Saturn as time,
Yep.
and teaching you things happen one moment at a time. So you go
Right.
brick by brick, and then you don't. If you look at the entire wall, it's too much. Just stay
Right.
here. Look. So then, over time, you build a wall, which is very useful. Presumably, I mean, psychologically, when people think, "Oh, you've built a wall," that's not a good thing, you know.
No, in this case, he needed
But
a
it's
wall.
yeah. It's the idea that
It was a perfect Saturn story, and of course, it ties into his chart. And like you say, when you see these oppositions, sometimes people are like, "Oh, no, that's terrible, an opposition or square." Well, it's definitely, something you're going to focus on, and life will pull you in that direction. But it's also, you can't argue with the fact that this man has achieved a tremendous amount. And yes, some of it is luck, but he really has shown up and worked. And now he's about 54 or something now, and is in his sort of, I think he started really getting into this after his Uranus opposition. He really started working on his inner life and working on the trauma and how maybe he was passing it on to his children, which is a beautiful way too, in my opinion. It's like, yeah, it's great to have all this luck and career and money, but really, isn't it beautiful legacy to your children to leave them with less baggage, so to speak, right? Or maybe that, help them work on whatever baggage you've given them. But also, you're right about the fact that I think, and then who knows what the exact equation is, but if a person has too much Saturn, not enough Jupiter in their life, then maybe he would just ended up being a common criminal, or who knows, right? But interestingly, he said his mother was a very positive force, and his father was in Aries, and he had a grandmother who was very Jupiterian. Gigi was her name. And he writes about her, about what an amazing force she was in his life, and that without her, he probably would not even have done a lot of the things. So yes, you do need Jupiter.
Yeah, that's curious, because the Jupiter's in the fourth, so that's a familial influence. So then, see, this is where you see that in a way he's talking about his difficult upbringing, but that might have been perhaps more of a perception on his part, because his father, whatever else he was doing.
No, it's real. Like his father, several times beat the mother.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, it was bad. No, it was not.
Okay.
It was not just like.
Okay. Well, then you could bring in, for example,
Mars in the fourth.
Yeah. Well, Mars, he's got Mars, Pluto, and Uranus in the fourth. That's already a little risky. But also the other problem is that one of the negative sides of Saturn opposing Mercury, which he has, is Mercury does rule the fourth. So immediately you draw in familial problems. But I would say the Jupiter, the grandmother there sounds like a Jupiter influence.
Totally Jupiter. With the total Jupiter influence on him. Yeah.
Exactly. So then it helped him to see or keep or transmit.
Well, to maintain a certain level of buoyancy too, because anyway, I encourage people to watch the Oprah interview on Apple or to read the book. And I know it's on audiobook too, and I think he read it. And then it's interesting if you're interested in astrology, to look at that chart, because I think you and I discussed when we first looked at that chart, that chart doesn't necessarily mean you're the most amazing superstar, film superstar. Also, his first success was in music. He was one of the first rap stars and all of that. And then he had that Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So he's had success in many areas, and then he went into film. Yeah. Oh, by the way, speaking of manifestation in him, he tells Oprah, and he tells in the book, that he had a manager that has been with him his whole career. And the manager and he sat down after he had all that success with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was already a very well-known star. They sat down, and this is very Saturnian. They looked at all the biggest male movie stars of the day, and they tried to identify what common elements that these guys had, and then they were going to find scripts for Will that would have them. And they came up with the 3 Fs. I think it was fighting. They all was, there was some element of fighting, Mars. What was the other one? Well, the last one I remember is fucking, but so there was trying to remember what the second one was. It was fighting.
Oops.
I know. Oops. Sorry. Oprah was better. She didn't say the word. There was 3 F's. Anyway, I can't remember now. But the point is, they decided that they were going to focus in Saturn.
Maybe that was it. That was the third one was maybe focus.
No, it wasn't. I'm trying to remember the third one. I can't right now. But anyway, so bottom line, his manifestation of becoming a big movie star, and for many years he was always the top, like #1 in the box office. I mean, it's billions of dollars his movies have made. He also did that as an intention. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that everybody can just say, "Oh, I'm gonna," he did already have a launching pad. People knew who he was, but then he worked really hard, gained Saturn, and he did have some flops, and afterward and stuff. But anyway, all of this to say that he's a really good example, I think, of both the power of manifestation, the power of having enough Jupiter to counteract the Saturn, and just the whole idea of, yes, you can manifest all these things, but there's at the end of the day, if you achieve all of the material things, there's got to be some focus on your life at some point if you really want to be a satisfied person, to go to the non-material, which you could say is Jupiter, Neptune. I don't know what you would identify there, but
yeah, there's his chart too. The other thing about his chart is that if you look at all his planets, they're all clustered between Virgo and Scorpio, and Saturn and Eris, but Saturn is definitely dominant there on the other side all by itself. So this guy is a very Saturnian individual.
Yeah.
And yet it's pretty clear that it's, for the most part, I'm sure you'll have whatever, but yeah, it's a really positive outcome. You would never say, oh yeah, it's bad. It's actually really good in terms of in terms of what we're talking about here. Whatever else you might say, he's manifested a lot, right?
Exactly.
That's the key.
And also he does say to Oprah, which I thought was lovely, was the Jupiter element. He was saying, I realized that comedy, from a young age, he used comedy as a way to diffuse tension in his family or at school. And then he realized no one can be racist when they're laughing. No one can be hateful when they're laughing. That's Jupiter. That's, the idea of you're identified. So he has a very strong Jupiter, doesn't he? I can't remember now. It's Jupiter conjunct Neptune, or no, that was Moon.
No, Jupiter conjunct Pluto, which is,
that can also be.
That's a good way. No, it does. Yeah, that Jupiter. Well, first of all, you get a lot in a chart from what is on the angles, what rules the angles, and where's the cardinality as an action principle. And this guy has a lot of Libra, that's cardinal, Saturn in Aries, that's cardinal, and then he has the Virgo planets in a cardinal position, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of cardinality, and then Jupiter rules the 7th and the 10th, which are cardinal houses. So it's sort of the notion that the person puts things into action. In action, there we're probably tilting more toward probably Mars is the most action-oriented principle, but it probably also illustrates that action is super important in manifestation, because you can have all the visions you want, but then until you launch something, try something, see what your action brings back, and then make adjustments and continue. There's got to be a circle where here's where I want to go. I'll try something, and you could also argue that Saturn is involved in that too, in the effort to do it and all that. But Mars is often connected to the actual physicality of. In fact, when you say exerting sounds almost more martial than Saturnian. When you say exercise, for example.
But there's usually both, right?
Both, yeah. Right? That's why Saturn, Mars.
Mars is also the courage, because often it's like, oh God, I'm scared, and there will always be a moment when you're expanding into something new, a new job, a new level of wealth, whatever it is, where you have to have the courage to. But I still go back to the sun, the idea that yes, the Mars is important, but at the end of the day, if we're going to summarize this for someone who's like, yeah, well, Will Smith is just lucky, or he got that chart, I don't have that chart. Okay, So that's true. I don't have that chart either. So, but so the thing is, okay, so what is the takeaway, right? Like, okay, I am not born with all these cardinal planets. What am I going to do? Well, these women are giving you a roadmap, and there's other people, but I like their roadmaps, and it's worth a try, right? Maybe one appeals to you more, or one other method, or maybe it's someone totally different. Maybe it's Wayne Dyer. I don't know, but the idea of, if we're going to link it to astrology and link it to, okay, what is the takeaway for me? How can I manifest something I want to manifest? Give this a try. But starting with the sun and identity is a beautiful way. It fits very well with the astrology. And it's a really powerful way to start noticing. Notice what mantra might be empowering, play with it. Then notice the results, like you said, then put it into action. Mars, keep doing it. Saturn, and hopefully you will get to a level of Jupiter, and then maybe the next level. And because you'll have more understanding, therefore more expansion.
So that's good. There you brought in a really key meaning of the sun as your identity. So it's like literally who you think you are, or what you think you are, which is actually in the most profound spiritual teachings I've come across. That's the key thing. It's the sense of how far do you believe your identity expands, and like, what are you really? This was, in the Sufi order, Pir Vilayat, the head of the Sufi order, pretty illuminated spiritual master, I thought. And he said a number of times that a critical aspect of life was, what is your sense of identity? And he actually would say things like, people don't realize that they're actually beings of light. Now, of course, now you're really reaching into.
No, but it's beautiful.
But it's actually but it's true, because if you a lot of the pain and suffering in life is feeling like one is hemmed in and not really capable of expanding into things, of creating, of feeling good. And that is a sense of identity. It's a sense of who you think you are. And the solar energy, it makes a lot of sense that it would be that exact principle. So that's good. Yeah, that brings it into a package where, in a sense, all the other planets are assisting the sun, or rather, or maybe helping the sun shape that identity, or be that identity, or discover that,
or act it out. So it's, if you can connect first with the idea that everything you are doing in your life, it comes out of your self-identity, and it does, because whether it's I identify as a person who, like this idea, it's easy for me to receive. Maybe you identify that actually, subtly or not so subtly, it's not easy for you to receive. And that is going to impact all of life. Like whether someone sends you energy, let's say healing energy, you're not even that might be blocked. Who knows? That's on the most subtle level. And then maybe in the most material level. And then you have to practice. So if you're saying it's easy for me to receive, and then someone says, here's $10, and you think, oh, your first thought is, well, I don't want to take that money. But then you go, oh, no, I'm going to act on my identity mantra. It's easy for me to receive. Here, thank you. I'll take the $10. Even if you think the $10 is not even deserved or makes no sense, you're reinforcing in the material world your self-identity. You've made this connection, and then all else comes after. But it's the steps. But the first thing starts with identity. So it's interesting because Jen Sincero does not bring astrology at all into this. Neither does Tosha Silver. I think Tosha Silver is an astrologer, but she doesn't bring it into her work very much. She brings in this idea of surrender, but they both arrive at the same place, and they both start at the same place, right? Because this Tosha Silver in her book says, it's easy for me to receive. That's a belief, right? And then this woman, so that's, I think, the biggest takeaway, to start where you are. What are you believing around the topic that you want to manifest? Okay,
well, we'll stop there. We'll say that it's a topic to be continued, because it's a really massive topic, and in some ways could be said to be the most important thing in life, a filter you can put everything through. So we'll explore it further in future podcasts. All right. So
okay, sounds good.